Okay, that's the first slide. So this is a picture of a clinic, a medical clinic for Syrian refugees in Turkey. I was asking a nurse working in this medical clinic about what made her finally leave Aleppo, Syria, about 2 weeks earlier. The moment I asked her, just by looking at her face, I knew I had done something wrong, asked the wrong question, a stupid question. She stopped talking, her face frozen. She asked me to stop the voice recorder. She said, "There are no words. All I need to do is Google Aleppo and the pictures will speak for themselves." Sorry, I can't even read what I wrote. "And the pictures will speak for themselves." She said that sharing her story isn't going to add anything to what is already obvious. It will only serve to reopen her wounds. That unknown villages and streets in Syria are now only known because they have been bombed and destroyed. "Look at the pictures," she said. "I don't need to speak about why I had to leave. There are no words. There are no words," she kept repeating over and over. And obviously, this is an image of Aleppo. I don't need to Google Aleppo, however, to see the effects of war etched into her face. Eyes that said, "How could you ask such an obvious and painful question?" And I think a lot of the people I had met responded to me with silence, really. I mean, and in the situation in Turkey is there are currently over 500,000 refugees in Turkey. But Turkey sees them as guests of Turkey. They don't call them refugees. And Turkey has set up these official camps, which on the outside look like prisons. And here you see this is to enter, you have to have your ID. And each family is given a caravan, or there might be more than one family to a caravan. And it's been described as the best refugee camp. And this is inside. Now, obviously, they have their own political reasons for why they call them guests. But, however, for many Syrians in Turkey, they're receiving aid, but many fall in between the margins, unable to get to the camps, but too poor to live in the city. So this is a picture of Fatima Ibrahim. She's 43 years old, widowed, with her 2 sons, who are unable to find work. She came from poverty to poverty, but remembers Syria, and says, "Sure, we were poor in Syria, but we're finding that it is more merciful than here. Our homeland could never oppress us." So these are the people that aren't really talked about because they're not officially refugees. They've fallen in between the cracks. She talks about how in Turkey rent has increased. They can barely afford to live anywhere. It's freezing cold. They have no heating. And she's unable to provide for her kids. She says, "When I look at them, I see them looking at me with their eyes when they need something, and when they look at me like that, the inside of my heart burns. I get so sad. There's nothing I can do for them." I asked her what she thought of what is happening in Syria, and she told me, "Wallah, if I say this to you, you may laugh at me." But then I promised her I wouldn't laugh, and she said, "I until now don't understand anything. What's right in this? Who's the oppressor? Who is the oppressed and dressed and ready to fight?" But these are 2 nurses within Syria. And I asked them what made them initially leave Syria, and they said that they never wanted to leave, but when they only decided to finally leave because of the airplanes from the regime. The airplanes were very scary. They never knew. The problem with the airplanes is you don't see it until it is above you, and that was very scary for the children. At least when the military would come into our village, we could hide in a different part of the village. But when they started dropping bombs above us, we had no choice but to leave. So I asked them, "Okay, then what made you," because neither of them were actually nurses before in Syria. Both of them stayed at home. They said, so I asked them what made them feel like they needed to help. And they said, "I wanted to do something for the revolution, for the displaced people, the people forced out of their homes, to help them, to give them something." And to me, this was a very powerful statement from them, because they're also of those people that have been forced out of their homes, yet they're helping each other. And that's what I saw in a lot of the Syrian camps that I went to, is it was mainly Syrians helping each other and running the camps and helping to run the medical centers. And if you were a teacher in Syria, then they'll try to make you teach in the camps if you're a doctor. And these women, you know, they were trained by doctors to become nurses. And they also told me about how they felt like the role of women changed, that now they have something to do, and of course now a woman has to be strong, and there are things we are asked to do. And now we've seen sites the average person wouldn't be able to handle. Also, in terms of helping the revolution, a lot of the women talked of being able to get to places where men couldn't have access to, bringing supplies such as food and medical equipment. So I think a lot of times in our discourses about Syrian women is we only talk about them as numbers and as helpless, and all you hear is the hundreds of raped Syrian women. And to me, I don't think that's fair to the kinds of roles they've actually had. And when I asked them about hope, whether they have hope for the future of Syria, they said, if we cut off hope, then it's impossible for us to live. We have to have hope. Inshallah, we have hope in returning. And they said sometimes they forget. Sometimes they go back into Syria to the free areas, and they forget that they have been forced out into Turkey and life goes back to how it was. But as soon as they see an airplane, they remember. And I asked them, what does love of homeland mean to you? And they said, love of homeland means to do everything you can to make it develop and to love each other. If we love each other, it means we love our homeland. And I asked them why they were a part of the revolution to begin with. And they told me the revolution started as a way to express our rights, to be done with the oppression from the regime. And one of them said, however, they feel that now the revolution has become an Islamist revolution. It's not like it was before. Before it was about freedom, and now they're fighting using women, children, etc., killing them. Now it's not about freedom of opinion, but now they are the ones killing our children. And lastly, when I asked them what they feel like, what they want from the outside world, and they simply said that all they want from us is our prayers. Now, this is a school within Turkey in, in Rehanli, and it is not an official school for Syrian refugees, because otherwise it would be shut down. So I think it's presented as a daycare, but in fact it is a school where they learn all the same subjects that you would expect from a school. And that's a mural painted on the side that some NGO helped to create. And one of the headmasters of the school was actually a human rights lawyer within Syria, and that worked with political prisoners until she was shot and was forced to leave. And I asked her if they talk about what's happening in Syria in the school, and they said no, they try not to, because when they come home, the children are surrounded by the effects of the war. Either they've been orphaned, or they know someone that's been killed. And this girl is, her name is Esma. She's 11 years old, and she shared with us the story of how she was forced to flee with her 10 brothers and sisters by foot to Turkey because the village they were from was bombed and their house was destroyed. When asked what she wanted to be when she grows up, she said, "I want to become an architect because all of Syria is destroyed, so I can go back and rebuild it, and we can make it even better than it was before." Her attitude is extremely positive and always looking ahead. That's why I wanted to share her story, to inspire that kind of attitude in us. Also, how many young girls do you meet saying that they want to become architectural engineers? I'm not sure I knew what that was when I was 11 years old. And these are some drawings within the school. Syria. So on my trip, I also went to, I was able to enter Syria, and you can kind of see I entered from Bab al-Salame. And when you enter, you see the Free Syria flag. So it was actually quite easy for me to enter. And you see that what kind of aid they're receiving. And I already have an issue with Saudi Arabia's involvement within Syria, because I feel like they exasperated or made it worse, but at the same time they're providing humanitarian aid. So we have to question their involvement. And when I first entered Syria, I felt personally very emotional because it was my first time entering Syria since 2010. And I got to see the sunset for the first time in years, and I was about to cry, and then I realized I was surrounded by tents, as you can see in the picture. And I was given a tour by the committee to help the self-esteem in the camp. So they were a group of women that went around painting things throughout the camp to try to make it look more cheerful. And they told me that even though we are living in the tents made up of cloth and nylon, the most important thing is that we are together in our homeland, Syria. And this is an example of some of their artwork. Over here is a school. And at the time I was there, it was freezing cold, and if I recall, there was no heating, really, except for, and these are people standing in line to collect food and water, as you see. And the way you kept warm was by lighting a fire and snow. There's snow, obviously, and fire within the camp. So, and you can see some of the tents come from the UNHCR, which is not really within Turkey, but this is within Syria. And when I talked to the people in Syria, I asked them what kind of message that they would like to give to the outside world. And they told me, and I was surprised when they said this, because I was expecting a different answer. And these were young Syrians, like early 20s, late teens. They said to me, "The Syrian student, wherever he goes, no one recognizes his certification. No one is accepting them within their universities. I want them to recognize their degrees no matter where they choose to study." And another young man said, "I just hope that the children youth are able to continue and complete their education. That's the most important thing." So, some more images. There's a tent from Saudi Arabia. And, sorry, there's a lot of pictures. While I was there, you could, a village nearby was bombed, and you could see ambulances coming in from Syria out to Turkey. And the last thing they wanted me to tell the world was, "We want to return to our homeland and for the world to stand with us." And the last camp that I have been to is Zaatari. And there's a lot, Zaatari is always in the news, and in a way I found it it was more like a city than the very structured camps within Turkey, and I found it kind of refreshing, and you saw trade and movement, and there's even a jewelry store, but I don't know as much about Zaatari. So, and this is also another nurse I met with in Jordan, and she told me essentially the same thing the woman in Turkey said, and how she was trained to become a nurse in Jordan. And I would lastly like to conclude with, when I asked the woman that I showed in the beginning of the slide, Hassan, who was already poor within Syria and then came to Turkey, I asked her what she thought the solution was for Syria. And if she could request anything. She said, "What I request is that we just feel compassion towards each other. I just want that we feel compassion for each other, that if, for example, you have this bite of food to eat and you see me here hungry, that you are unable to eat it alone. And you'll say to yourself, maybe this woman here is more hungry than I am. That's what I ask for. That Syrians feel compassion for one another, and that there's compassion and wafa. There's some words I couldn't really translate. And friendship between us, and love between us."
Loyalty.
What?
Loyalty.
Loyalty between us. Believe me, everything will return as it was and better. We don't want haniya or compassion from the Turks. We want compassion from Syrians towards each other. And that's the quote I have up there. Just that. That's the only thing I ask for. And I think, to me, she represents perhaps most Syrians from Syria who are apolitical, who aren't really whatever, who weren't part of the political process to begin with, but they just want to carry on with their lives. Okay.